Hi. Thank you for attending today's reading. Let's begin. My uncle. Trigger warning. Note. Hi. So this is something I don't like to discuss very much, and I came here to do so after a few friends encouraged me to discuss this a little more. I'm choosing to do so here on Reddit as it is one of the most anonymous places I could think of for posting this, and I always kinda hated the way people treat me after finding out about this. Thank you. Oh, and major trigger warning for this story. It gets real dark. When I was 16, about a month into the 11th grade, I was living like most 16-year-olds do, I guess. Going to high school, hanging out with friends, going to work, all the normal high school bullshit and drama that accompanies that. There was one thing that wasn't quite so normal. I was leaving for Spain to go on a sort of exchange thing over there for a few weeks around mid-October. I was pretty excited about that trip. I mean, a few weeks of Spain in the middle of the semester. Who wouldn't be excited about that? It meant I not only got to travel and see a whole other country with a bunch of new experiences, but I also got to skip out on the freezing Canadian weather for a bit. Anyways, a few weeks before I was due to leave, my family was having a dinner around the dining room table, and that's when my parents brought up the news. This wasn't a long conversation, and it's one I hope no one else ever has to go through again. But it was an important talk, and one I still try not to think about too much. After we had finished our meal, my parents had to have a conversation with my sister and I about some major family news. One of my uncles had been kidnapped in the Philippines by a terrorist organization. We'd found out through a ransom note that had been sent somewhere. I've never really thought about where the note is, to be completely honest. Of course, we were being very optimistic after receiving the news and hoping for the best. Kidnapping situations with terrorist organizations rarely go well and are probably one of the shittiest things to ever experience, and mostly, we were just worried. I never mentioned this conversation with any of my friends at the time. It was something to keep in the family. And so I went on, living the life of a pretty normal high schooler, attending my classes, working, and seeing friends while trying to maintain optimism within the family. This wasn't something that left the family at the time. And it wasn't something I think any one of us thought of every day even. But it still came up every so often. Anyways, I went to Spain and had a fantastic few weeks. Traveling from Madrid, going south, and then following the coast back up to Barcelona. I got to see tons of sights. Even a soccer match between Atletico Madrid and Valencia. Easily the best sporting event I've ever been to. Before leaving, my parents had warned me to be on the lookout for anything to do with kidnapping. This was still a fresh situation that was on our minds, and had cautioned me about the news, as we could be hearing something through that. After a few amazing weeks in Spain, I came home and really just kept going on with normal high school life. Started dating a girl sometime in there, and I was mostly just enjoying hanging out with friends, getting high and doing stupid teenager things with them. I don't really remember too much from this period, but a couple flashes of my friends back then. I had things to look forward to as well. My high school band got the chance to travel to Los Angeles to workshop with professors at universities there, and do a recording session at Disney. Lots to look forward to for a 16-year-old kid. Getting to spend a week, a long week at that, doing what you love and hanging out with friends. And even better, we got about 2 days in Disneyland to go on the rides and see the park, which was probably one of the most fun experiences I've had in my life. Just basically doing a 2-day theme park bender and going on as many rides as possible. We even performed in Disneyland twice. Once with the full wind band symphony on a public stage. And once with the jazz band on an even bigger stage. That was probably the best part now that I'm looking back on it. And then, a day or two before I was supposed to come home, I got a text from my parents that told me explicitly not to look at the news and that there was a conversation we needed to have when I got back. This wasn't much of a challenge. The days on that trip started early and we often didn't get back to the hotel until past 11 p.m. Exhausted from the long days. So avoiding the news wasn't too hard. And it's not like the radio could be heard on a bus filled with 50 teenagers. But it definitely wasn't good. I freaked out a little bit not knowing what possible family situation could have come up that I shouldn't even check the news. But I tried to push that thought from my mind and enjoy the rest of the trip. Unsuccessfully to my disappointment. But I had at least managed to not let anyone else get wind of the situation so it didn't think their trip as well as mine. We flew home a day or two later, and what was the point in ruining this once-in-a-lifetime trip for everyone anyways? So we went on and then flew home a couple days later, and I spent pretty much the entire time trying not to completely lose it. Once I landed back home, I won't specify where for anonymity reasons. My parents had driven to the airport to pick me up. The flight got in late, so my little sister was at home still. In bed probably. And it was dark and a little cloudy outside with a few stars that you could see above the airport. There are certain things you remember without having wanted to on days you get bad news like this. Like the feeling in the room. Or the look on people's faces. Or the words that were said. Or even the view of the night sky. As soon as I stepped into the car after throwing my luggage in the back, my parents turned to me. This exhausted and sad look on their faces. And that's when they told me. I won't be saying their exact words in this story because there are still some aspects that I wish to keep entirely for myself. But they told me that a few days ago, around April 25, 2016, my Uncle John, who had been kidnapped, had been executed by the Abu Sayyaf terrorist group that had kidnapped him and held him hostage for nearly 6 months in the Philippines. There were a lot of news stories about it. And a video of him being beheaded. My parents had simply wanted me to enjoy the remainder of my trip before I got the news. And they also wanted to be the ones to tell me. And face to face. An aspect I'm glad they chose to do now, because I honestly don't know how I'd have responded if I heard on the news. I mean, imagine seeing your uncle getting beheaded by terrorists. It's traumatizing enough to see a man who had watched you grow up be murdered so brutally by such horrible and disgusting people. This was not a short talk we had sitting in the pick-up and drop-off area at the airport. I don't remember if I cried at the time. But I wouldn't doubt it. Even writing this now about 5 years later, and I'm still getting that feeling of a panic attack in my chest and throat. This was not good news. It meant I'd never get the chance to see or speak to my uncle ever again in my life. That there would never be a time this wouldn't trail around behind me. I've seen the video. It made me sick to watch. I remember actually throwing up after I watched it. And I've seen it since with almost the same reaction. My family and I spoke about it. But I had personally refused to let anyone else know about this because I didn't want their pity. I'd made the mistake the day after receiving the news of talking to my girlfriend at the time about it. She was very supportive and didn't tell anyone else, which I'm glad for. She was good like that. But I could tell from the way that she looked at me and spoke to me that she was interacting with me like it was thin ice, and anything she said or did could completely ruin me. So I didn't talk about it to anyone, ever. This got harder when I went back to school the Monday after I got back from LA. Some of my friends would talk about it over lunch, and every time it was brought up I'd find some excuse to leave the area and disappear for a bit. It wasn't easy to avoid discussing it, but I managed. And I just didn't want people to know. This got harder to do when my social studies teacher brought it up. But I was always good at getting out of class and skipping, and I managed to do that during that class. After a while it stopped haunting my everyday, and I was able to finish high school like pretty much every other teenager in Canada. With a very average day-to-day life, I think. My girlfriend at the time never once brought it up, and it generally just became understood that I wouldn't sit through a discussion with any of my friends about kidnapping or anything. I'm pretty sure they still think I was just uncomfortable with the topic and would prefer to be ignorant to it. I even managed to go to university and study music. And I'm graduating from my bachelor's in a few weeks now, having managed to live without anybody in my new city knowing a single thing about anything about this story. That is, until lately. I got into a discussion with some friends the other day about human trafficking. And I tried so hard and quickly to change the subject, but it came back up with the others. I refused to stay in the discussion and only managed to get him to change the subject by stating that I had some personal experience with the subject and that it was giving me flashbacks. Direct quote. My best friend reached out the next day, and when I still wouldn't discuss the story with him, he suggested I write it down and post it somewhere anonymously because it might help me get it off my chest. So here I am, writing this story here for all of you to enjoy without knowing anything about me or having the chance to give me that pitied look everyone gets when I even mention that I have experience with things like this. This whole personal history still follows me. And I'm sure it always will. It's influenced some of the biggest choices in my life, such as joining the Army Reserves while studying at university. Something I intend on doing full-time upon graduation. Something I did largely because of this history and my personal experience with it. Because I never wanted anyone to ever get the same news I got, and any chance of stopping something like that I'd take. Anyways, that's my story. I'm not quite sure how to end something like this, but I hope you enjoyed reading this jumbled mess of my thoughts on this as I write it on the brink of a massive panic attack. End of story. That is all for today. If you want to support my automated channel, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. See you tomorrow.